Have an update on the billions of dollars being taken.
Scammers, as we know, are becoming more and more sophisticated.
Lying in bed, wondering how I could tell my wife that we'd lost everything.
Our mission is to protect consumers worldwide from scams. Cybercrime is going through the roof, and we need to take action fast.
We cannot keep on working in silos, and we've heard it here a couple of times already today. I think GASA is bringing this cross-sector perspective that is so much lacking in most of the events.
I'm hoping to start finding ways to help take the information I have and really help people.
These type of events are finally going to hear we took action instead of we need to take action and make the world a little bit better.
Welcome, everybody. My name is George Abraham. I'm the Managing Director of the Global Anti-Scam Alliance, and welcome to our GASA meetup. For those who are not familiar with the Global Anti-Scam Alliance, in short, GASA, our mission is to protect consumers worldwide from online scams. And we do that by bringing together all the stakeholders: government, banks, telecom operators, social media, cybersecurity, any company or organization who wants to better protect consumers from scams or is being abused by scammers and wants to do more. And we do that by sharing intelligence via meetups like these, but also we have 8 email groups where we share intelligence in a real-time manner. We have a best practice database. We organize free summits, as you just saw in the introduction video. We have an online directory for members where they can find each other and solve problems. And we're launching more and more chapters in Singapore, Australia, but also Brazil, Mexico, North America, and Africa. We do a lot of research, and one of the research papers we're going to discuss today is the global state of scams. And finally, we're developing more and more solutions. We were one of the founding partners of the Global Signal Exchange, and in December, we hope to launch our second initiative, scam.org, to globally help consumers better check if something is a scam, report a scam, but also get victim support if, unfortunately, you have been scammed. We don't do this alone. We do this now with more than 120 members globally, including several in our session, like F-Secure, who has been a long-time partner, and JP Morgan. Before we begin, the presentations and the discussion are going to be held under Chatham House rules. So you are allowed to use the information, but you cannot directly affiliate it to one of our speakers. Also very important, please feel free to use the comment section to introduce yourself and also pose questions. It might be that one of your questions we're going to highlight. That also then means that your name is going to be shown. So if you do not want to have your name shown, please change the name you're using or do not ask a question. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists to discuss the global state of scams. And Don, may I start with you?
Yeah. Good morning, afternoon, good evening. So Don Spalding, I work at Verizon in our domains organization, and I work specifically with financial service customers, our larger clients, our banks and financial institutions, and we do a great deal of work in collaboration with those institutions and other organizations like GASA to see if we can start to make an impact on some of the things that we'll be talking about today, largely in the scams and the fraud space. Pleasure to join today.
Thank you very much, Don. Enrique.
Thank you. Good evening from Singapore. My name is Enrique Hernandez. I'm the Assistant Director for Cybercrime Operations in Interpol, seconded officer from the Spanish National Police. And obviously in Interpol, as the only global law enforcement agency, scams are one of our priorities, as it's indicated by our member countries whenever we work on regional threat assessment reports that we try to produce every year. So obviously, happy to be here to discuss how we can really support member countries, in our case from the law enforcement perspective, to combat scams more efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henrik, and thank you for joining us at such a late time in Singapore. But Rafi, we go to you where I think it's very early. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, morning everyone. Ravi Govindaraju from JP Morgan Chase. I'm based in New York. I lead trust and security for our consumer and community businesses, which is a function focused on building capabilities and technology to help protect customers from fraud and scams and prevent them from happening in the first place. And so we are, as a bank that serves more than 85 million customers, we are very, very focused on scams as being an important topic and one that we believe is important to invest in and make sure that we are protecting our customers and doing the right thing by them. And so happy to be here and share insights with you.
Thank you very much for joining, Rafi. Robert.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. So I'm Robert Harris. I'm Head of Industry Relations at Feedzai. If you don't know Feedzai, then basically we provide the technology and intelligence to help banks, payment providers, networks stop the vast majority of scams on card, transfer, telephone, even in branch, we're seeing a trend. So wherever they happen, we have the technology to try and stop the victims losing their money. I'll also add that Feedzai are a foundation member of GASA, and very happy to be part of this organization. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Robert. And last but certainly not least, Andre, also from the UK. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Yuri. My name is Andrei Skorobogatov. I work for the Home Office, which is the UK's Ministry of Interior, where I lead on our kind of national fraud strategy and also our work to tackle fraud coming in from overseas. So for the UK government, we recognise fraud as a national security priority. It's been an area of significant focus for us, and it's something we'll be continuing to work really closely with all of our international partners in the future.
Thank you. And again, thank you to the entire panel. It's really great to have all the different stakeholders at the table, because that's what the Global Anti-Scam Alliance believes. We can only solve the problem around scams by working across all the industries, banks, telecom operators, government, law enforcement, and solution providers. I'm going to dive into the Global State of Scams report, which we just released 2 weeks ago. It's actually, I think, now the 5th time we're publishing this study. We started with asking governments and law enforcement for data on scams in the first 3 years, but that didn't work out very well because the definition of scam was different per country. So 2 years ago, we switched to a consumer survey, and this year we surveyed 46,000 respondents across 40 different nations. And we are doing this together. The study was done by Opinium and supported by Feedzai. And we asked Opinium to really make sure that we have a representative sample representing the different countries, but also the population per country, age, gender, and region. Before I go into more details, Robert, I believe you wanted to comment on this slide.
You're not really comment on the slide, Yuri. I think it's just more a point of commending GASA for this valuable work. I think it was a really good idea to switch to taking the consumer's perspective. And I just for context for everybody on the call, as far as I'm aware, and I don't mind being corrected, but as far as I'm aware, this is the only global consumer report looking at scams. And we all know that scams is a global problem. So I think this report goes very well to help. There's some very good national country reports that are produced, but I think this one helps frame those in a global context. So I think that's really the only point I wanted to call out here. And then just to, I think, to the comment you made about the definition of a scam, we could probably have a webinar just on that topic about what is a scam. But yeah, I mean, having this global report really helps address that point. So in some countries, for example, a scam is purely related to when a payment is made, that somebody then regrets. In other countries, a scam also can potentially include when somebody hands over personal information. So having this global context, I think, is really valuable and helps frame, I think, each individual country report.
Yeah, I would add that one of the remarkable things I found in the report that I thought was really differentiated from some of the other reports that we read, we often focus on the data around the volume and the financial loss, but this report in particular did a great job of really gauging the emotional impact of the victims. And I thought that was something that was quite unique about the report.
We try to cover as many aspects of scams as possible, and we do this also together with our members. So in December, we're going to sit down again with our members to discuss what should be the questions next year. How can we get a better understanding of not only the size of scams, but also how we can better protect people from scams. Of course, the big elephant in the room is always how much money has been lost in scams. And maybe I want to clarify, because in the last 2 years, we reported that approximately $1 trillion was lost in scams. This year, we decided to report a lower number, and that has several reasons. One, we switched the research company, and we made sure that the panel was very representative. But also, the number of 442 billion is really different from the 1 trillion, because this is only for the 42 countries we investigated, while the 1 trillion was an extrapolation to the global market. And thirdly, we took a different approach with the outliers. If you ask a consumer how much money did you lose, some will underestimate it, some will not share because they are ashamed, but some believe that they have lost 10 million because that's what they see in the investment scams in the screen appearing for them. Well, in fact, they maybe have invested 10 or 20,000 US dollars, which is, of course, an incredible amount to lose, but they did not lose 10 million. So we took a more aggressive approach in removing the outliers. Donald, I think you also wanted to comment on this slide.
Yeah, one of the things that we're seeing here in the US that I think is really interesting is since the first full year of Stir Shaken here in the United States, we actually saw robocalls decrease, and they've continued to decrease, 2022 to the most recent data in 2024. But what we've seen is though we've decreased the volume of robocalls and the scams associated with that, is that actually the attempts and the efficiency of the attempts have really increased. And so in 2021, there was an average loss here in the US of about $500 per scam. But over the last couple of years, in 2022, it jumped to like 1,400. It's kind of leveled off a little bit, around 1,500 per attempt. But we're actually starting to see some greater efficiency and the ability for the fraudsters to actually convert the attempts. So we're up to almost 40% of scam attempts here in the US are actually resulting in losses. And that's up from about 10% in 2021. So the scammers are getting better. We're actually starting to reduce their attack volume, but we're not really having an impact on their efficiency. So I think that's noteworthy in some of the trends that we're seeing in the US that I think would be interesting for the panel to be aware of.
Yeah, interesting point indeed, and I think we will get to this part later. Again, are scammers getting better? Maybe because of the use of AI. Andre, I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, I was just going to really echo that. I think what we are very much seeing is a kind of a highly complex criminal methodology, incredibly organized. These are functionally kind of fraudulent marketing businesses, very immoral ones, extremely well-funded ones with huge amounts of capital to spend on R&D, and they are very, very capable at rapidly evolving and shifting to attempts to block them, which can necessitate a continuous fight in order to be able to effectively disrupt them. But I would also be keen to stress kind of the significant non-financial loss and impact on consumers. We are very much aware of, whilst the financial loss is the biggest impact, and the loss can vary for different individuals. Some individuals might lose $10,000, and for them it's not a lot of money at all. And some might lose £800, and for them it's kind of life destroying. So it's going to be important to recognise that losses isn't everything, and also the significant emotional pain that losing fraud can cause, whether it is embarrassment, humiliation. How do I tell my family that I've lost all of our life savings? And it can frequently result in both kind of suicidal ideation and suicides as well. So there is a very real human cost at the end of this, and that's not even getting into some of the most despicable type of frauds, such as the ones linked to sextortion.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, I think for me, I think just a couple of comments from me. I think the right hand side really just shows the wide range, the massive difference between that average loss. I think you're thinking ahead to next year, we need to dig into the types of scam, because we know, you've got the one-off types of scam that tend to be sort of typically higher volume but lower value. That's probably what's driving some in those lower loss markets. But maybe some of the higher value scams in Saudi, probably more related maybe to romance or investments type scams. So I think by digging into the type of scam, we might understand that. And I would also add that, there's some good initiatives going on globally. We know from GASA, for example, in New Zealand, they have a campaign called rescam.org, which is basically an AI agent that keeps scammers very busy, increasing the return, the cost of doing business for the criminals. And at those lower value ends, it may actually make it ineffective for them or not profitable enough for them to carry on at those lower value scams. So yeah, it wouldn't address the high value loss scams, but in terms of those low volume ones, I think there's things we can be doing, different approaches for different types of scam.
Thank you, Robert. I think that's a very good suggestion for next year's report. Going further in the report, one of what surprised me when we first did this study is we always believe that the developed nations are being scammed the most, but that's actually not true. What we see is that as a percentage of GDP, Argentina, Brazil, South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, several countries in Southeast Asia are relatively suffering more from scammers than other countries. Enrique, would you, as in your position at Interpol, like to comment on this?
Yes, thank you. I mean, that's a very interesting fact because, I mean, it's true that there are also more developed countries being targeted and being susceptible of being a scam, but that's because of the number of attacks. The issue with developing countries, because that's something that we are seeing when we draft our reports and we get the input from the different countries, is that our countries that are evolving, the digitalization is evolving very fast, but the let's say digital culture of people in these countries is not advancing at the same rate, meaning that it's very easy for them to be a scam because they don't really have that culture. They are not really used to moving the digital environment, so they are more likely to fall for these scams. For example, I remember this week during the Singapore International Cyber Week, someone called Singapore like the world capital of scams, because it's true that there are a lot of attempts here in Singapore trying to scam people, but they are well prepared because it's something that's been happening for years. So there are not really so many successful attempts. That's happening that in some developing countries in regions like Africa, Latin America, Asia, I mean, they are still lacking that culture, so they are really more likely to fall. And that's why these stats that are shown in the graphic are like that.
Is it then, Enrique, that we should invest more in awareness building in these countries, or do you see other approaches which we should take to better protect people, especially in these developing nations?
Yes, I mean, we really think that cyber hygiene is something that's very important. That's something that it's essential. It's something that from our side we are trying to promote and invest in because we think it's essential and it's really the only way, or at least one effective way, to try to reduce these victims in these developing countries.
Thank you, Enrique. Rafi, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to add, in addition to like the financial losses, which we're showing here in terms of the distribution as a percentage of GDP, and it's very interesting to see. There's a second element of scam victims, I believe, which again is going to be largely concentrated in many of these countries, where it's actually the human impact of where customers are being people are being lured into scam compounds and in the name of employment scams and other things. And so we also have to remember, like in a number of these places, there's a significant human loss associated with scams. And to all the points Enrique raised, like really leading in here is going to be important.
Yeah, we indeed see scam compounds growing very rapidly. They're not an easy problem to solve. And what I understand is also that scam compounds are no longer something which is only typical Southeast Asia, but they're also now popping up in other regions. Andre, I see you nodding your head. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, scam compounds is a fascinating, it's incredibly depressing kind of context. For those who don't know, there is extensive reporting on this issue, but there are hundreds of thousands of people from across the world being trafficked under false pretenses into a number of scam cities or scam centers, which are essentially highly organized serviced offices and compounds of 10 to 20,000 people in the kind of Southeast Asia region, primarily in Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, where they're essentially held under armed guard and forced to work, 18-hour days to scam people across the world. Where if they do not meet their kind of KPIs, and they certainly have KPIs, they can be brutalized, or even murdered, and it's kind of quite frequently occurs. Now, however, what we're also seeing is a kind of a degree of mushrooming of these scam centers all over the world, including kind of through a kind of a franchise model, where sometimes people who formerly worked in scams compound and maybe have become volunteers in them are now going back home to their own jurisdictions and setting these things up. In fact, in the UK, we've seen one come up on the Isle of Man. It's quite there's plenty of reporting on these issues, but it's a very much a highly present and extremely organized threat. These are some of the most organized criminals in the world, and there are strong links between fraud, human trafficking, drugs, and a range of other incredibly harmful activities.
Yeah, I fear we're only going to see a growth here, because I think our biggest challenge at the moment is that we are not able to arrest scammers. It's basically nearly a free crime at the moment. Moving on to in our research report, one of the surprises to me was, and we have seen this trend breach already appearing 2 years ago. I mean, traditionally, the idea was elderly people are getting scammed more. They lose a lot of money, especially in investment scams. But that is now changing. We see actually the younger generation reporting that they are more victim, and especially in highly educated. We have a tendency to have children. I mean, the children part, I fully understand. I've got two myself. I'm overworked, overburdened, don't have time. So I act quickly and I get scammed. But I was surprised with the youth part. Andre, would you like to comment?
Yeah, happily to. So I think we've done quite a bit of kind of thinking and research on this, and I think there is an element of it's those people who are most likely to spend more time online and interacting with remote transactions, or so, for example, who are much more likely to become scammed because of the sheer volume of time they spend online, but also the ubiquity of online interactions. So, for example, if you are used to online dating, you're much more likely to become a victim to a romance fraud than, for example, if you've never done online dating before. Likewise, if you are used to buying things on, on online marketplaces, you are much more likely to get scammed there as well. You are much more trusting of these interactions, and you might go about your day kind of go about a year without hitting one and then get hit back really badly. So there's very much a case of kind of both young people being targeted by this. However, what I think we are seeing is that although it is not the traditional vulnerable groups who are getting most frequently hit or even maybe losing the most money, it is very much the more traditional vulnerable groups who are experiencing the greatest harm. So, for example, the older people who might necessarily be less frequently scammed, they are likely to have much more serious impact as a result of being scammed. And it's an important point to note, especially as kind of we think about our customers and the citizens we serve, in terms of how do we identify those vulnerabilities, both in terms of volume and in terms of harm, and how do we ensure we put the relevant protections and measures in place.
Enrique, I believe you also wanted to comment.
Yes, just a brief comment because I mean Andreas explained it perfectly. One of the things that I used to listen in my career in Spain when I was working cybercrime is that and scams are totally fair because everyone may be a target. I mean, obviously that's not really true because the cyber criminals are looking for vulnerable groups, and although it's true that the elders are also targeted, as Andrea explained, they don't really spend so much time online, so they are less likely to be a scam. But for young people, we really think prevention is important. It play an essential role. We developing some activities in the recent years, sometimes in cooperation with our private partners, because again, we really think that this kind of activities, campaigns that are focused on prevention, the risk, the different type of scams, that it's true that there are even more and more trying to adapt to whatever the scammers need to achieve their objectives. It's really essential, especially among the young people, to reduce these numbers and, well, try to make the scams more likely to happen.
Yeah, yeah. And for the record, I believe everybody gets scammed. I think all of you have been to our summits across the globe, and as you know, we have the tradition to scam our audience, and usually 50% of where we send a phishing email or a fake invitation to dinner, we get 50% at least to click on the link. And for the fake dinner, we last time we were even able to get 6 credit cards there, so we actually had a great free dinner. Let me go to the next slide.
Sorry, Yuri. Yeah, can I just make just one very quick comment. I think it comes back to what I was saying earlier about the scam type. I think yes, the young people living fast digital lives probably fall for job and online purchases very quickly. They probably maybe don't even typically report it. But then the headlines will be around those much higher value, which tends to be targeted at the older adults, right? So we see the headlines about people losing their life savings, losing lots of money through romance scam, for example, which is the older generation. So it's probably best that the young people just don't make the headlines. So yeah, I think we just need to drill down into that next layer and do it by a bit more detail.
I think you're right, and just as you said at the beginning of our discussion, next year we need to dive more into the type of scams and the demographics and country. But that's actually what this sheet is showing, the different types of scams. And across the board, we see that online shopping scams are still the number one scam, but things are changing. We see investment scams becoming bigger and bigger and more reported to us as a scam they experience. And in some countries, even investment scams are now on position number one. Rafi, would you like to comment on this slide?
Yeah, I would say from the data that we see, this is largely a similar pattern in the United States as well, where, from a count perspective, shopping scams are probably one of the most prevalent ones. We see a lot of those originating on different social media sites and other sort of online platforms. Investment scams tend to be the high dollar scams. So while the shopping scams might be low dollar, the investment scams are the significantly higher dollar ones. Well, from a count perspective, there'll be fewer. The dollars in loss will be significantly higher on the investment front. The other trend that we are seeing, and we're seeing a significant increase of is impersonation scams. So as we've sort of really cracked down and implemented controls on both investment scams and shopping scams and driven customer education awareness, we've seen a big shift towards impersonation scams over the past 12 months. And as we've implemented newer technology, it has almost actually helped scammers. So as an example, we implemented call branding on some of our phone numbers, but without the right sort of authentication in place, that branded call was actually used by the scammers. Now it actually appears as the bank is calling you on your phone. And so you're more likely to believe when that number is spoofed that it is actually your bank calling you, and you're more likely to give out that information. And so customer education awareness here, especially as new technologies get implemented, thinking end-to-end about how that is going to be used by the bad actors is going to be very important, or we're just going to see this sort of shift in the different markets.
What we also see, Rafi, is a huge difference per country. In the USA, for example, fake invoice scams are, how should I say, way more popular, which is the wrong word, than in other countries. Well, for example, employment scams are more common in India. Do you see huge differences per country?
Yeah, we definitely see, there's a lot of local elements into how different scams are manifesting in different countries. I do think more broadly, and curious for others' thoughts on the panel as well, but shopping scams, I think we generally see across all different countries, and investment scams, I think, are probably the two predominant ones that we're seeing more broadly, but the other ones tend to vary by country.
Thank you, Rafi. Thank you. Donald, I believe you also wanted to comment.
Yeah, just back to the comment on call spoofing. So over the past year or so, we've been really analyzing a lot of our call traffic back to our consumer base and working with the FIs here. And we're seeing somewhere between 35 and 40% of those calls are actually spoof calls that are originating from their outbound numbers. So it's substantial and it's actually growing. So I definitely see that as a big vulnerability and a choke point that maybe we can focus on a little bit more and target in terms of prevention.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of work to do. Andre?
Yeah, I think, I mean, fraud at its heart is a crime of abuse of trust, right? So criminals will use whatever means they can, whichever kind of is kind of in the press or in people's minds, kind of what they're anxious about, whether what there is a degree of uncertainty about, to create that trust. So, and that will vary country to country, but they will frequently use, they use the pandemic, they'll use, a local, a local hurricane or a tsunami or something like that. And we do know that they will absolutely take and move in sometimes incredibly quickly within hours and minutes to take advantage of any kind of anything where people are searching for additional information or trying to find a way to create that sort of sense of trust in a context of uncertainty and anxiety amongst potential victims. So that is obviously kind of context dependent and will vary country to country. So it could be partly be the cause for the variation between countries and different types of frauds.
Yeah, indeed. We see also in Singapore that authority scams are working very well because there's a very high level of trust in government. So if a law enforcement officer calls you, you do what you're being told. So there's definitely a huge difference per country. Moving to the next slide, Robert, I mean, this is, I think, definitely in your area. Would you like to comment on it?
Yes, we spend a lot of time analysing the payments, obviously. I think there's a number of things that we've learned from this particular statistic or this measure. Can just quickly summarise. I'm happy to get ideas from the rest of the panel. I think first and foremost, what hits you here is just the vast number of different channels that are used by scammers. So, as you shut one down, they will just move across. I think secondly, actually we're seeing a rise in the number of scams that are being channeled through cards now. If you add up the credit and the debit, it actually totals more than the number of transfers. So what that means for people who are trying to defend these attacks, I think it really means you have to take a sort of cross-channel approach. It's no good just having solutions just on one channel. We can see through the data, we can see that the scammers are remarkably aware of who the victim is and who they bank with. So, for example, for one bank, when they find out who it is, they may ask that victim to make an online payment. For other banks, they will ask the victim to go into the branch and make the payment. So they're really sophisticated and they know the best channels which will give them the best chance of success. I think the other point to look at here is the regional split. For some channels, it's roughly equal across the different regions, but for others, such as gift cards and e-wallets, there's a massive disparity. So I think the really important factor here, if we look at crypto, for example, is, look, we can see on this report, 11% and rising probably of scams are transferred via crypto. But if you think about the overall total volume of payments that are made on crypto, it's probably less than 1%. So there's a massive disproportionate amount going through crypto. So it's that proportion on each channel, which I think will be very revealing as well. We're expecting crypto to go up. We're expecting wallet to go up. But But we know basically as you close down one, then the scammers will find another way. So that's the sort of conclusions we got from here. Andre?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of come in, and I think especially for financial services colleagues on the line, I think it's really worth drawing out the links between the kind of the first payment, which is made by the victim to the criminal, and the especially in cases of authorized fraud, and kind of the wider money laundering and financial crime risk that they will be seeing and dealing with. So I think the kind of the payments that people make, individuals, consumers make, will probably be, again, depending different countries, depending on what people are most used to spending money on. For example, in the UK they might be much more likely to spend use kind of a wire transfer than maybe a credit card payment, just because people are much happier to pay. That's how the UK banking system works. But I think what I'd be keen to point out is that I think whilst kind of the evidence on the wider money laundering is kind of patchy, as everyone knows, I think the fraud is a significant driver of money laundering across the piece. I mean, some suggestions some estimates have suggested it could be up to 50% of all money laundering proceeds, in addition to kind of proceeds of other criminality, and fraud appears to be, by and large, to be included in the normal and the usual flows of proceeds of crime, much more so than necessarily being kind of a unique or separate to that. So it's kind of it's from the way that these, at least how we believe the kind of the criminal organizations are structured, is you will have, there will be people generating the leads, like you would have in the marketing industry. There will people actually supplying the internet technology and the telecoms technology to facilitate the crime. There will be people making the actual criminal fraud and the kind of connection. And victims will pay money, and then the money will then be kind of exfiltrated through kind of one of these methods, and then subsequently through more traditional money laundering methods, usually. Back to the criminals themselves. So it's really worth thinking about how the fraud piece fits into the wider econ crime piece.
Andre, I also want to give Enrique the opportunity to reply. I mean, Enrique, what do you see around crypto in your space?
Yes, thank you. Just a quick comment about crypto, because I mean it's true that's still not the most prominent way or used by criminals to move the money, but it's something that we are seeing that in most regions is increasing really a lot. We cannot call crypto a cyber threat, as we have been reported by some countries, like, oh, crypto, that's another kind of crime, because obviously it's not a crime per se. But it's true that we are seeing that's the way that criminals are starting to use more often to move the money, not only for scams. Obviously, it's any kind of crime, it's drugs, it's terrorism, because obviously they've realized that for police officers, it's harder to track and to see who is behind the crimes when they use cryptocurrencies, that when they use more traditional ways, because usually even if they use people to move the money that are linked to the organization, but obviously it's not the masterminds, it's always easy to get to someone who is really related to the investigation, so you at least have someone to start to get additional information to continue. So I mean, we think that cryptocurrency is going to be a big problem in the future, because we can see that it's rising in most regions, and it's going to be more often used by criminals. And obviously that's why we are trying to keep track. We are trying to train police officers all over the world, so they are able also to trace cryptocurrencies. So it's not something that, let's say, it's impossible for some of them to identify the criminals that are behind these the scams.
Thank you, Enrique. So I fear that we're going to have more trouble with crypto in the future. Donald, I believe you also raised your hand.
Yeah, and again, there were some comments made earlier about really the fraud and how that actually plays into kind of the bigger criminality that we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of that in the U.S. too. We have been doing some investigation and collaboration with some law enforcement agencies here around SIM boxes in particular, and we're finding that almost it's pretty consistent that when we do find who's behind the campaigns that are launched with these SIM boxes, it's generally organized crime that's feeding back into bigger criminal activity. So I do think that it's just really important to understand that this is a piece of a bigger ecosystem, and it's definitely a big component of how those criminal activities are getting fed today.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Thank you. Donald, now that you're speaking, one of the issues we see with reporting is that people are unsure where to report or do not make it's a difference. I think you're working on something where it's going to be easier to report.
Yeah, so just speaking specifically about what Verizon's doing, so we're trying to make sure that our customers can voice any concerns, report any incidents across all channels. So we have the ability, in messaging channels, voice channels, social channels, to really make sure it's super easy for folks to get information back to us. We have a super responsive internal team. That internal team is both consumer and enterprise business facing. We've really increased our activity and involvement in organizations such as GASA, working really closely with other organizations like NCFTA to bring a lot of the data and the information that our consumers are sharing with us is really helping us to better understand, and more importantly, actually help us with enforcement efforts. So the way we're looking at it today is the voice of the customer and the data that the customer is providing us on a bigger scale is actually helping to feed some of those enforcement activities. And so the better we are at allowing customers to very easily get to us that information, the better we're going to be on the back end of being able to bring that data and information back to being able to have that convert into actual open cases and hopefully eventually arrests. So we are really working very hard to make it easier for our customers to get that information to us.
That is fantastic, Don, because I think it is crucial that people keep on reporting, because if they don't, we cannot act on it. Law enforcement cannot do anything, and the criminal actually becomes really invisible. I'm going to watch the time a little bit. We have 7 minutes left, and I also want to give room to the audience to ask questions. Andre, I think you already stressed it a little bit in the beginning. It's not only about money. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, I mean, for individuals, I think money is the initial concern. I think it's also what does the loss of the money actually signify? How do I retire? Can I retire? In case of older people, or how do I tell my family that the money is gone? And fraud is remarkably one of the few remaining crimes where there is remarkable amounts of victim shaming, especially by the victims themselves, first and foremost. And considering they are being frequently being targeted by highly sophisticated organized criminals who have made it their business and have very sophisticated infrastructure behind them to execute that. I'm not 100% sure it's entirely fair, especially considering when the sophistication of modern fraud makes it very difficult to determine it as an illegitimate interaction in the context of your day-to-day interactions. I mean, most people don't go out day-to-day and with a name to become victims of fraud. But obviously, and it can have really significant emotional, psychological effects. It also has a very significant effect on people's ability to trust what they see online, ability to trust online marketplaces, and it has a real impact as a result on growth. And it's worth also thinking, from a government perspective, thinking about the impact on the economy at large, where there are huge defensive costs to industry, there are huge losses to industry as well as to fraud directly, and there are huge opportunity costs in terms of people not spending and not investing, and it has a really significant. It's a societal issue which is much larger than just the direct financial cost, even though that is of course huge.
Yeah, definitely. And what we see is, as I also saw and discussed in the beginning, especially developing nations are being hit here way harder than than the people from richer countries. We see in developing nations there's a lot more financial impact, and people have to borrow from their family or sell their assets way more than is the case in developed nations. Moving on to the next slide. This is always a surprise for me that over all the years we've now done the study, phone, text messages, still the most used medium. Well, I expected actually that social media, instant messaging would be way more popular. I mean, Donald, this is a little bit in your area. Would you like to comment?
Yeah. So one of the things, so we talked a little bit earlier about stir shaking, and we talked about here, and I'm really speaking specifically about here in the U.S. So what we're finding is for every solution that we've tried to implement as an industry, the fraudsters have kind of had a step ahead of us in it. And so I think just in the past year, we're really starting to feel that we are moving from the defensive to the offensive and some of the things that we're doing. And that's largely really related to increased collaboration between the carriers, the FIs, and organizations such as GASA. But prior to, I think, the past 12 to 18 months, the fraudsters, I think, were really taking advantage of an industry and an ecosystem that really was left kind of open. So back, if we think about like data networks and cybersecurity frameworks and all the things that we've applied traditionally across those network channels, a lot of those same frameworks were not necessarily applied to the messaging and the voice channels. And I just think that over the last year or so, we're starting to recognize that, one, we have to really start following some of the same disciplines and some of the same practices that we've seen in the cyber world. And then two, we've got to do this together. And it really has, I think, in the last year, because of the grassroots efforts that we've really begun here, started to change that a little bit. But up until recently, I think those channels were just left vulnerable. And as everyone knows, they're going to go to the path of least resistance. And that was just, it was definitely a path that was left wide open for them. I do think we're starting to see some of that shift to social now, because as we start to get better around voice and messaging, it's moving. One of the things we're seeing in the messaging space in particular is as we get better at SMS, they're starting to move to over-the-top messaging applications. So it's a constant moving target. There's lots of different nuances within those channels that we're really, challenged to make sure that we keep up with.
Thank you, Donald. And I look forward to seeing a huge drop in these numbers next year. I know it's a challenge, but it would be fantastic if you were able to achieve that. Then, Robert, I know this is a slide which has your interest.
Absolutely. Yes, no secret there, right? So for me, this is probably the most revealing statistic in the report, actually, because it comes back to the heart of the matter, right? How are we going to stop? How are we going to make people aware? So the fact that 73% of people feel they're confident in recognizing a scam is quite alarming. And I say that in the context, there's some other statistics which we haven't shared, but are also in the report. So there's a lot more besides these slides in the report. And the other statistic that goes along with this is that, out of 57% of people who've had a scam experience, 23% have actually had money stolen. So almost half of the people who've had a scam experience have lost money. So that completely sort of contradicts the fact that people feel very confident in being able to spot scams. And if we can just imagine a world where everybody's confidence was true, then we would have really gone a long way to solving the scam problem in terms of reducing that return on investment for the criminals. If we could stop 73%, and if you look at the number that were not confident, there's only 13% who are not confident. So for me, this comes back to how we can, right across the scam life cycle, as early as possible, but also at the end with whether the banks and the payments are made, right? Having much more contextual warning rather than the generic messages, much more contextual warning that would really hit home and make people really sit up and think. So yeah, I think this is the challenge for us at GASA, is how do we make reality and align with people's confidence.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think, in essence, scams are a part of human nature, in the sense we like to be confident about ourselves. And Rafi, I mean, one of the big challenges I think the banks have is, and I experienced this myself, is that people are being social engineered so well that they want to keep paying the scammer, even if the bank contacts the victim. Are you sure you really want to do this? Would you mind commenting on that?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges. We've actually, in interviews we've done, we've heard like they're coached to the point that they can even expect the questions you're going to ask as the bank, is the scammers have collected that information and they train you in exactly what you can expect to be asked. I think ultimately what it comes down to is slowing down the transaction in each of those instances. We obviously want to make sure we give our customers access to their money and allow them to be able to do whatever it is they want to do with the least amount of friction. But when we have indications that that is a scenario where there could be social engineering, or a customer might be a victim of a scam, really slowing down the transaction, having that conversation is the most important thing. So within our digital channels, we have scam models that are constantly looking at scam risk, and to the extent that we believe that that transaction is a high risk of scam, we'll outsource those transactions, and we have a specialized scam call center that is trained by behavioral psychologists, and they'll give customers a call and have a detailed conversation with them to try to walk them through all of the components of it and try to see if they could break the spell in that instance. The same in our branches, in other channels. We really try to introduce the right amount of friction to make sure we can have the right conversation with customers. We're also looking into launching programs like trusted contacts, where we can add someone that you feel you're comfortable with sharing your financial information with on your profile. And so in this instance, it could be a trusted family member who could be brought online to have that conversation, because sometimes a third party like a bank telling you that might be a scam may not always work, but it could be a family member who could break through to the customer. And so that's another avenue that we're looking at. But ultimately, it just comes down to the right amount of friction, slowing the transaction down, and asking the question several times to try to see if we could break the spell.
What you just named, the just-in-time prevention measures, I think they're crucial, because this slide clearly shows that many of the measures being taken by consumers to check if something is a scam are not super effective. I mean, I mean the third from the top, I check for spelling and grammar errors. That's something of the past. I mean, AI is now making sure that the scammers are using perfectly written text. I mean, we were just discussing, Rafi, the just-in-time preventions. Any things you like to add to that, apart from what you already named?
I think, and going back to the points Robert already raised on the prior slide, I think while customers might feel confident they can recognize the scam, we cannot underplay the importance of education here. And so one of the things we're trying to do is constantly talk to our customers about the scam risk, the different channels that they're interacting with scammers in, and how they could become potential victims. And that's whether it's in-branch and financial center education seminars we're holding, constant emails and educational campaigns we're doing with our customers to warn them about the latest trends we're seeing. And this is where, even going back to the point Don was raising about some of the feedback from customers, to the extent that we have the right information sharing happening across sectors, we can use that to just-in-time warn, here's the latest scam trend, this is what you might expect. Because oftentimes, like, these things are quickly evolving, but if we can get that information in front of customers, we might be able to prevent the next victim. And so I think that's where I'll just link back to some of the other messages that have already been raised, but having the right information sharing, the data flowing through, will allow us to go get that in front of our customers and have those specific conversations.
Robert, I believe
I'll just quickly add what Ravi said there. I think this one is maybe something we can take away, and we can learn some tactics for using identifying whether something's a scam or not, are sort of persistent, like asking family and friends is always a good approach. Other ones, like you said, spelling and grammar and the price being too good, have probably now sort of lapsed in terms of their effectiveness. So it's a matter of always identifying which methods that people are using that are the most effective. And again, we can do that through measuring, through discussing with victims and from customers which ways are actually bearing fruit in terms of the defense. But just giving out, the same old warning to check the reviews on the same website is obviously going to lead to that false sense of confidence that we saw on the previous slide. So yeah, adapting which is the right measures, I think, is important.
Thank you very, very much, Robert. We're running out of time, and I also want to give the audience some room to ask questions. But before we do, and I cannot show the slide because for some reason the slide doesn't want to go to the next one. But we had one slide where we saw we asked, okay, who's responsible? And I have to say to you, Enrique, good news. The police is seen on the third position as being responsible, but also being appreciated performance-wise on doing a good job. Rafi, I believe you also wanted to comment on this slide where we see the several stake owners being seen as having to take responsibility and how they're doing it. Unfortunately, I cannot show that slide, but would you comment on it? Would like to comment on it?
Sure, I'll just take a quick minute here and probably bring us full circle back to where we started the conversation. I think ultimately from a protecting consumers' perspective and actually preventing scams from happening, it's a full ecosystem approach. And I think the slide does a good job of sort of laying out. There's an involvement from the government, there's involvement from the police and law enforcement, there's banks, there's social media companies, there's telecoms. There's all of the different platforms where a consumer is actually interacting. And to the point that we raised about the definition of scam up front, the scam many times by the time it comes to us as a bank has already happened. Like the contact was made, the trust was gained, and somebody was convinced to do something. And so the right amount of information sharing and accountability across that ecosystem is very important in order for true prevention to happen. Because if we don't actually know what's happening upstream, there's only limited information on which you're trying to decision if the money should be allowed to be moved or not. And so I would just sort of reiterate the points that if we're truly trying to prevent scams, and it's not just the losses, but the overall sort of emotional impact, the overall impact on consumers, we need to really make sure that all these parties are working closely together. And I think the slide does a good job of consumer expectations.
Thank you, Rafi. I think those are excellent closing words. We are nearly out of time, and I see one question in the comments I wanted to ask to all of you panelists, and it's about deepfakes and AI. Last question. If you look at the future and look at AI, when do you think, where are we going with scams next year? Are we going up? Are we stabilizing? What do you think? Let's start with Robert. Where do you think we're going in the next...
Where's the crystal ball? I don't know. So all I know is what we're seeing in terms of the trend we're seeing AI starting to make an impact, but at the moment it's really just automating existing modus operandi, just making it more effective, as you saw there with like the grammar being better than it was before. Where I fear it may be going is towards new types of scam that we haven't yet seen. Obviously, deep fakes open up a whole range of new opportunities. So yeah, very, very cautious about that. But again, it just comes back to us being able to very carefully track what's normal in any individual customer. What does normal behavior look like? Because it doesn't matter what the attack method is. If it's going to be a scam, it's going to be abnormal behavior. So that is where we're placing our bets.
Thank you, Robert. Enrique, your short answer?
Well, unfortunately, I think we are going to to see a rise in the number of scams, because although I agree that we are only seeing the tip of the iceberg when we are talking about AI, we are already starting to see cases using deepfakes, not only with video, even with phone voice. And I mean, we really think that's something that's going to increase because it's lowering the bar even more for criminals to get into the scams market. And unfortunately, it's something that they are going to use in their benefit to try to scam more people.
Thank you, Enrique. Andre, your vision?
Yeah, I think AI is going to make fraud. I think first of all, AI is going to make fraud, help all of us tackle fraud, but it'll also certainly exacerbate the threat. I think threefold, right? It'll make fraud more believable, such as through the use of deepfakes. It will increase the volume of it because you can automate the actual fraudulent interactions. But actually, the most critical one, I think, is going to be where it will help enable and create all the enablers of fraud you can do automatically. You can create stuff, create accounts, create profiles, all of that sort of stuff. You can do that it can reduce criminal operating costs, and that's what I think is anything increases fraud profits is likely to lead to more fraud. Anything that increases their costs is likely to decrease fraud. Treat it as a business.
Thank you. Don.
Yeah, just real quickly, one thing that I think AI really is already being used to do is to actually better target potential victims. I think being able to cultivate the data and the things that they have access to today, whether that's via the dark web or however they're accessing things through breaches, they're targeting very specific types of campaigns, and they're getting much more sophisticated and intelligent, and I'm sure they're using a lot of tools to do that. And that's, I think, a threat today.
Yeah. Thank you, Don. And Rafi, last but certainly not least.
Well, I agree with what all the other panelists said in terms of both the sophistication and the impact on customers. And to Andre's point, I think it's a high profitable business, and this only increases margins. So they will obviously lean in pretty heavily on that. I will just take a slightly different lens to it to end on a positive note here. I actually, AI can also be very helpful from a prevention perspective. If we can all come together as a broader ecosystem and share the right data and signals, the ability to process the amount of conversations that are happening, whether it's with phone providers, with the social media companies, pair them with the real-time interaction data that we're seeing at a bank, will actually also allow us to prevent and drive prevention higher. But that's going to be incumbent on a significant data sharing program globally that works at scale. So just to end on that positive note, to say that is something that we should really be focusing on as a group going into next year.
Then, Rafi, thank you very much for ending on a positive note. I also want to thank all the other panelists, Robert, Enrique, Andre, Don, for sharing your knowledge and thoughts. We're going to continue this conversation at our summit in Washington, D.C. on the 3rd and 4th of December, and hopefully define more and better solutions to protect consumers against scams together. Again, thank you very much for joining us. Also, a big thank you to our audience and their questions. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you very much, and have a very good morning, afternoon, or evening.
Thanks.
Thank you.